Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Pivoting During COVID-19 with Girl Scouts of the USA, presented by Independent Sector. I'm Dan Cardinale, President and CEO of Independent Sector. For the next hour, I'll be joined by colleagues from Girl Scouts of the USA who will share their experience during experiencing pivoting during these very uncertain times. Before we jump into the conversation, I want to just call out some housekeeping notes. First of all lines are currently muted. If you have questions, we'll be taking them later on in the presentation, and you can submit them during any time during the presentation in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. This webinar is being recorded and will be emailed to you within 24 hours. And we really ask that you take the survey at the end of the webinar. We really depend on your feedback to be able to curate and design the kind of content that's going to be most helpful as we all navigate these uncertain times. For those of you new to Independent Sector, we extend a special welcome. Independent Sector is a national membership organization representing a diverse set of nonprofits and foundations and corporate giving programs, all working to ensure that people living in the United States thrive. All people living in the United States. During these incredible and challenging times for the charitable sector, we are pleased to offer additional resources through these interactive sessions and on our website to everyone, regardless of membership, that is to say, free of charge. We see this as a vital support to the sector, and we're really grateful for the generous support of the Gates and Skoll, Barr, and Hewlett Foundations for making these presentations possible. If you want more information about the sets of resources we have, you can visit independentsector.org/COVID-19 to see the range of things that we have that will help you to kind of engage. And if you're interested in taking actions related to the nonprofit response and relief to COVID-19, you'll find that all there. And for those of you who are interested in joining, and we hope that you are, you can visit independentsector.org/membership, and you can find all the information you'll need there. So now I'm excited to welcome my colleagues from the Girl Scouts, some of whom I've known for a very long time. Sylvia Acevedo, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Girl Scouts of the USA, Kathy Hopinka, who is a National President and Board Chairperson of the Girl Scouts of the USA, the former Global Lead Partner and National Managing Partner and Vice Chairman of KPMG, and Mary Vitek, who is CEO of Girl Scouts of San Jacinto Council. Sylvia, Kathy, and Mary, thank you so much for being here today and sharing Girl Scouts of the USA story, which we think is an important sector story for everyone to learn from. And the Girl Scouts, as many people know, is kind of one of the nation's really kind of crown jewel civil society organizations. It's a lauded and incredibly important institution reaching all over the country, working with young people and particularly young women. So we're excited to get into the conversation. I'm looking forward to diving into your experience around navigating COVID-19, balancing this kind of very laser focus you all have on driving the core results and being incredibly attentive to the communities that you serve, while also in this kind of crazy time, thinking very creatively and flexibly about what is the best way to respond as a whole network to these uncertain times. So our hope is that the folks on the call today will walk away with new insights and inspiration about how their organizations can pivot and remain relevant and in service of the communities that they serve. So let's dive in. Before we get into the meat of stuff, I always like to give folks a little bit of an opportunity to get a sense of your background. So I'd love to hear kind of how you got connected to Girl Scouts and just what you love about it.
Well, I'll go ahead and start. And you know, what got me to my position here at Girl Scouts was actually a Stanford researcher who called me. I had just been working in technology and had this great career. And they said, you know, we're doing research. You're one of the first male or female Hispanics who've ever gotten your graduate engineering degree from Stanford. And they asked me why. And the more research they did and investigation, it turns out that my life pivot point was Girl Scouts. And I didn't know that, but that's what ignited my interest in science and taught me about how to create opportunity and gave me confidence and courage and just so many of the great things that really were the pivot point for living my life of my potential.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I became interested in volunteering. I got on the national board and then I was asked to step in as interim and then now the CEO. So I'm so grateful for Girl Scouts.
Yeah, it sounds like it's been one of those remarkable through lines throughout the course of your life, which is a real great gift. Wow. How about you, Mary? Kathy? Yep.
Yeah, you're probably going to hear kind of a similar theme here, right? So I became a Girl Scout when I was 6 years old. And it was really Girl Scouts, when I look back, that really gave me this confidence that I needed at such a young age. And I had some really challenging circumstances in growing up. So I've been a Girl Scout. We always say once a Girl Scout, always a Girl Scout. I've been a Girl Scout since I was 6 years old. I'm the mother of 2 girls who are Girl Scouts, and I like to say I'm married to a guy who is man enough to be a Girl Scout. But I've been very proud to be on the national board for under 10 years now, and really honored to be serving as the chairman of the board, national president, for these past 6 years. And it really, as I said, Girl Scouts really made the difference in my life at a very critical point in my life, and that being a young girl. So
that's great. All right, so Mary, you also a lifer?
So I came to Girl Scouts later in life as my daughter's Girl Scout leader, but also I've been a professional in Girl Scouts for 25 years. So
yes, as lifer.
If just 25 years count, yes, I've been a lifer. And what I value, there's so many things I value about the Girl Scout experience. Right now, that thing that I'm holding dear is the sisterhood that it represents, because that has really come through in the past 8 weeks. And I'm sure you'll dig that out of us as we answer the questions today. Yeah.
So even more relevant as we dig in, I'll just flag something that I want us to talk about. When organizations have folks, the 3 of you who've been with it for so long and it's part of your DNA, there is both the deep understanding of its mission, but it also can make it hard to pivot and change. So take us back to March 2020, just a few months ago. And when, did Girl Scouts realize that there was really something a little bit bigger than what we've seen before, and that you were going to have to pivot? And tell us a little bit about how you kind of sussed that out, how you paid attention to it, and then kind of how you talked about it.
Well, I'll start. We had been carefully watching what was happening in Europe and around the world, and we began making plans for remote. We're very grateful that our Seattle CEO, Megan Ferland, alerted us about how impactful COVID had been to her council as well. So we took it serious very early on and began making changes. We also began thinking, how do we leverage the movement? And obviously that includes our councils and obviously our board. And we created a plan and communicated that plan that we were going to go through different phases. And, our first phase was the immediate. So it's girl safety. Then it's, obviously business continuity, cost reduction, making sure that there's no in-person girl sales. And then we moved into the second phase, which is, how do you make Girl Scouting relevant in this, shelter at home environment? And now we're moving into how do you reorganize? Because we know the world is really going to be different. And so then finally there's the fourth one, which we're hoping for it someday when, it's going to be the long-term recovery. And that's how we saw it at the national, looking and working with local. And Mary, you saw it at the local level.
Yeah. So locally for us, it became very, very real when the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo that was breaking records in attendance was canceled in a moment's notice. And we all knew it's here and it's very, very serious. So we had to pivot very quickly. And the first piece was to suspend our cookie booth program. We were in the middle of our cookie sale. We had over 6,000 booths canceled and we scheduled, and we had to make the announcement that we were canceling those booths out of the safety of our members, regardless of the financial implications. Probably one of the toughest but most important decisions I've ever had to make as the CEO of this organization. The second one was pivoting to remote work. We were a little more prepared for that. We have a seasoned IT team. We have a board level IT committee. We have a disaster recovery plan. We live on the Gulf Coast, so we're, that plan has been tested multiple times, and we have a crisis team that is in place at all times to stand up at a moment's notice. So we were ready for that part. And so we made that pivot pretty quickly and pretty successfully. The second phase was really, to Sylvia's point, was connecting with our members. So within a week, we had scheduled a virtual friendship circle to connect with our members and check in on how they were doing. Within a few days, we had a new landing site on our website called Girl Scouting at Home for our members to go and access resources while they were at home. The most important thing we knew was first safety and security, but the next was maintaining that connectedness that is so much a part of the Girl Scout experience. And we were very clear early on that Girl Scouting may be different, but Girl Scouting is not canceled. And we wanted to make sure and maintain that connectedness at a time when probably families needed it more than ever because people were isolated and fearful. And so we did what we could at the council level, but our troop leaders also stepped up in remarkable ways to keep in touch with our girls.
That's great. So, Kathy, you're nodding, so I'm assuming you're good?
I'm good.
Good. So now let's get a little bit under the hood. So many of us, I'm sure, on the line today, and then my personal experience is working in a federated system where you have a national board, you have a CEO and a national office, and you have local chapters, councils, affiliates, whatever folks call them. And I know this doesn't happen in Girl Scouts, but my experience is sometimes they don't all get along. And, decision making can be, a challenge. So here we are in the midst of a crisis, and you've got, a major pivot going on. Tell me how you all kind of managed that. What worked? What was in place that allowed that to happen? What were some of the bumpy things we might want to learn from?
Kathy, do you want to go ahead? So for me, it's really important. Oh, Kathy froze. Go ahead, Kathy.
Okay, so kind of what was kind of top of mind, if you will, when this all broke, and how did we kind of navigate from our different perspectives. I'll say first and foremost, the thing that's top of mind, and you heard Mary and Sylvia reference this, is the safety of our girls and those of our volunteers that are supporting in this process. So that's front and foremost. But then it's all about speed. We always talk about the speed of the girl. So we have to move quickly. And, so the alignment, you kind of reference this. So, over 100 separate councils, so that the importance of alignment and making sure that we are able to move together was really super important for us. So being bold, and we've been talking about this from a national board perspective, is being bold and being decisive and having that real authentic leadership in the process. So communication was really important at this time. And when the alignment is important, and getting everyone's voices into the process is important. But I think from a board perspective, the one thing that I will say is that this is a time when you really need to understand and appreciate governance. So, the eyeballs in, fingers out, how we can support management. We're asking the tough questions. How do we support them? But you got to have your fingers out so management can move. So then the challenge is from a communication standpoint, because it's then communications that go to the chairs of all the other councils, so that everyone is a loop. So communication is really super important, and it's really respecting the roles that each of us play in the process. And sometimes in a crisis that can get overlooked. You can have the same mission, but if you're not appreciating roles, you can run into a bit of a challenge.
I want to hear from your other two colleagues. I just want to sum up what I heard. A number of things. First of all, there's a history and a a value of bold leadership and acting with agility. 2, there is real clarity about roles and responsibilities and governance specifically. And then communicate enables folks to have a sense of what's going on and who's making decisions, especially when they're clear about their roles and responsibilities. Are those?
Terrific. Yeah, you can throw in another communication in there too.
Right, exactly. Okay, great. So what else, Sylvia, Mary, what else would you add about this moment?
I'm sort of in the middle because, Kathy said it really well from the national perspective, from the board, and just the national perspective. And, for us, as Kathy said, it's girls, and Mary too, girls' safety is key. Urgency, is so important, and unity, and being able to, and you get and keep that unity through communications and talking about and working through the issues. So, from the GSUSA, the national level, that's that was so key. Girl safety, urgency, and unity. Over to you, Mary.
Well, so before you go, Mary, let me just push a little bit on that. So, hindsight is 2020. So we look and say, wow, they got it right. They moved quickly, definitively. They figured out how to use a structure that was in place. But we have to just remember, like even 2 months ago, we didn't really have such clarity, especially nationally, about what this was. So how did that work?
Well,
you must have gotten some pushback.
So one of the things that we did, you're very right. It's 50 states, different perspectives. We would work on what we call the best current view. And it doesn't mean it was optimistic. It just meant, what are the experts saying about what we know now? So we could make our decisions based on that science and expert perspective. So we would have best current view, and we would timestamp it. Because you're right, this was moving so quickly that, information was being made obsolete. So we needed to make sure that it was grounded in that kind of best current view perspective. And you're right, some people would call me up and say, this is not the reality in my state, right? But we, again, referring to Meg Ferlin, our Seattle CEO, she had said, watch out, this thing moves fast and it has a massive impact. So we had already been forewarned. And luckily, we have been working through some of other tough issues, our cookie programs and other programs. So we began developing a bit of that movement muscle of moving fast. But again, the speed that this required so much communication. I think we are only now starting to pull back, but we were doing communications frequently to the field, including our board chairs. Mary.
Yeah, no, I would add to, I would say, I was going to say communication. I'll abandon that because that's been covered, and I'll add one more thing to the topic, and that is really vulnerability. We were all moving so fast and trying at the council level to do what we thought was the right thing for our members at that moment in time. But we were really, once we got past the remote work and the initial messages, we were really in an uncharted territory, and we were all figuring it out as we went. And that process, I feel like I was on, I spent 12 to 14 hours a day on Zoom calls, team calls, email, phone calls, trying to keep everybody informed as to what we were doing, to answer my board's questions about how are we doing now, what did you think about this, but to hear from my colleagues around the country. So how are you doing this? What are you doing? There was a ton of sharing going on, and that was incredibly important. We were basically rapidly prototyping what the future might look like in a matter of weeks. And there was a lot of sharing going on to help us navigate those waters and to not feel like we were isolated and doing it on our own.
Mary, you bring up a good point. I think Kathy would agree. I think we all decided across the movement that we would leverage this moment to fast forward to the future.
Yeah. Yep.
But Dan, I think all of us would agree. It wasn't easy. I mean, it takes work. It's hard work.
The two things, Kathy, that this hard work also, one was said vulnerability that Mary said, and you don't hear that a lot when you hear success stories. There's a sense of the strong leader or leader group that move forward, and I just love that. But Sylvia, your point also, I just want to suss out. I don't want to push back because you're shy and retiring, so I know you would never do that. But if this isn't true, but what you also said was there was transparency you were being clear at each moment about what the facts were that you all were using to make decisions. And you were vulnerable, the way Mary said, about saying, and they could change, and we'll timestamp them so you can actually know what the latest is, but you can also look back and say, oh, wow, maybe they made good decisions, maybe they didn't, but they're tracking. So that's a fairly high degree of transparency.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Even at this week's CEO call, there were some things that we were trying to move a little fast. And, our CEOs told us we maybe moved a little too fast on them. And so myself and other senior leaders, we had to say, you know what, you guys were right. We were moving just a little too fast. And we had to admit that on a CEO call. So, you're right. The vulnerability really is important, because you don't always get it right when you're moving so fast.
Right?
I'm
Exactly.
just going to chime in just a little bit more on that to reinforce that point, because we talk about authentic and transparent leadership, and Mary used the term vulnerability. I think it's really also a sign of growth and intelligence. I mean, if someone says they have all the answers, I think we always say run as fast as you can in the opposite direction. So it's this iterative process where you're getting feedback and you're changing, and really good crisis management really requires that.
Yeah, it's remarkable to me. Particularly, and I mentioned this to you as we were getting on the call, you all are one of the civic infrastructures for the country, and have been for decades and decades and decades, and in all of your personal stories, amazing force for unleashing young women into the world as leaders and change agents. And one of the envies of the Girl Scouts has been your cookies, right? The first massive social enterprise, right? That really kind of blew open there first. You also had to reimagine it really quickly with Cookie Cares. So how did you do that? How did you approach it? What was involved? What's the good, the bad, and the ugly?
We created that with an end goal clearly identified and with a target date, 10 days. And what we had to do in those 10 days is we had to create an online ordering system and create a marketing campaign that would ignite interest so that girls could move to their virtual cookie booths. And what was at stake is our cookie program is typically 3 months long. We had lost an entire month, so a third. And it left us with $50 million of inventory. So there was a real number associated with that. Now, Girl Scout cookies, that's what powers our local councils and our local Girl Scout. That money doesn't go to national, it stays local. Many people don't realize that girls and women's programs typically get less than 9 cents on every dollar in philanthropy. And so the cookie program is really the way that we power this amazing Girl Scout, the civic, archetype and American icon that you were talking about. So, we had to make that happen in 10 days. Luckily, again, we had already begun taking on those really hard and very difficult conversations around baker agreements, supply chains, logistics. So when this happened, we already had some of that muscle that we immediately had to start flexing. We also redirected programs and marketing efforts and other marketing campaigns around this so that we could, really quickly pull this off. And I will say it was a 24/7. It was Herculean. It was through the weekends. It was at all different levels, board participation, local council, our suppliers, obviously getting so much feedback from our girls, and, the ultimate goal, and we had it clearly identified, is that anyone could go to our store, Cookie Care, girlscouts.org/Cookie Care, and order cookies delivered to those first responders who are risking their lives, or to somebody who you just want to say thank you for what you're doing, or even as an indulgent treat, right? But everybody did this Herculean effort because they knew what was at stake. Our entire movement was at stake. Well, Mary, you saw it from the ground level, at the local level.
I did. I was one of the 30% of the councils that was still, quote unquote, in season when we had to suspend the sale. and had a lot of inventory sitting in homes and in cupboards around the council. We served 26 counties, so spread out over a very large territory. It was incredibly inspiring for the national effort to come in and support us locally. I was the only council in Texas that was still in our sales. So I would see my sister Girl Scouts on social media promoting the program to their social network to support a sister Girl Scout council that was still in season and had a lot of inventory left over. We shared it with our local media. We had a donor step up and buy a large quantity of cookies to be delivered to local food distribution organizations in our local community. He called me just yesterday to update me and say that he had just gotten word from one of the organizations that it is a Meals on Wheels program. They deliver Meals on Wheels to senior citizens, and they were putting a box of cookies with every meal going to seniors, and that it was the most amazing response that they were getting. That, you know, our cookies are delicious, so I'm sure that's part of it, but I think it was about so much more about, you know, the memories that sparked, the, you know, just the experience of Girl Scouting and delivering that to our seniors who may be feeling isolated and not connected at the moment. So it was an amazing program, and it was really where the sisterhood of Girl Scouting that I mentioned earlier really came to life in an amazing way and a bright spot in some very difficult days.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about this, but I want to just come back to it because I think it's such an unusual characteristic. So national networks and movements, especially with the kind of legacy that you all have, are not historically known for their speed, right? For lots of reasons. And you've talked a little bit about it, but if you, like, lessons learned in this new world for other legacy organizations, what are the top of mind things that were the critical drivers to enable you to move with this kind of, you know, it's powerful. It's not just getting it right, but it sounds like you were left stronger as a whole institution through the process. So often there are dead bodies along the way, and they're like, okay, don't want to repeat that. We got the right answer, but whoa. But it doesn't sound like that to me. So I'm curious, what was it that enabled you all to do this?
Well, you know, Dan, maybe I'll start with that. I mean, I will start with the reality that it is kind of in our DNA, you know.
So, you know, Kathy was talking about
confidence, character. We talked about, you know, the speed of the speed of girl.
Yep.
Yeah.
Kathy, you are coming in and out a little bit for us. So Sylvia, why don't you take it, and Kathy, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so, you know, truly Kathy has set the stage at the national level about the importance of being bold, and it is in our DNA. And, you know, in particular, we had been taking on the tough challenges as a movement, those types of things that you can kind of keep pushing off into the future because you're like, oh, yeah, I know it's a problem. But for us, we took those on, and we began working on those years ago, even without a deadline. And we are so grateful that we did.
Yeah.
Because we work through those organizational muscle. You know, you come together, you form, then you storm, and then you norm, and then you perform. Well, we had kind of stayed away from the storming phase. And so we worked on that agility muscle. So it was really that time that we had done previously that allowed us to flex so quickly. And, you know, I'll just talk a little bit about how that reflected with our program and then give it back to Kathy. So, you know, so when I think about Girl Scouts at home, what I really see is we try to figure out, how do you take this experience and make it real, right? Because suddenly the in-person wonderful Girl Scout experience, everyone's sheltering in place.
Right.
The concept was, how do you make this come alive? And we really took from that, you know, when we go camping in the great outdoors and it starts to rain, we don't go home. We reimagine the experience. And so that's what we did. We began reimagining the experience and reimagining our program so that it could still have that fun, that relevance, that engagement, the skill building that girls wanted, but in a way that wasn't school. We wanted girls to feel like they could reach through this computer screen and reach into that friendship circle and squeeze another girl's hand. And the way we recognized that we were successful was the badges earned. And I'll tell you that we tracked that, and we thought, maybe, we're going to have a hit in how many badges earned, in the shelter and home environment. We were surprised. Cybersecurity, huge hit, especially with everyone working remotely now. What we saw with girls is that, we were on a 10,000 a month cybersecurity badges being earned. In March, we only got a 20% hit. 8,000 badges. I would have been happy with 1,000. So 8,000 told us you're really on. And the stories that girls told us, we got so many stories from parents and grandparents who said, "Oh my gosh, the Girl Scout, she earned her badge. She called me. She helped me walk through the preferences on my home computer and my iPhone." So we really saw that, we got it because that virtual experience became a live experience. That was still relevant and fun for girls, but not school.
So I don't know where you lost me.
We lost you
early on, but we want to hear.
So I'm sure Sylvia covered a lot of this, but you're talking about the why, and I started with, the reality of it is, I'll start with, it is in our DNA. We talk about building girls of courage, confidence, character. You heard us all say about, the speed of girl, but in our civic take action, that's all of, who we are. But I will also say that, and I think Sylvia referenced this earlier, this understanding existential threats and being prepared. Preparedness is also a part of our Girl Scout DNA. But, we recognize, and we talk about this a lot at the board, is, a crisis is a challenge.
Yeah.
And a challenge is an opportunity. It's like how you frame it, right? A challenge is an opportunity. And it gave us permission to innovate and to accelerate on a number of things that we were looking to do. And I think that's what Sylvia was starting to talk or was talking about. So I don't know where you lost me in the previous. That's kind of the key messages that.
Yeah, no, it's great compliment. I want to give one more question, and then we'll open it up. So just to those folks that are with us right now, please put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll be getting those to the group as much as we can. We already see some coming in. And then if we don't, what we'll do is we'll actually provide them to this group, and then we can circle back to folks in writing or as a follow-up in some way. So my final question, I think, there's a lot we could ask here, but I guess the question is relevant to the next 3 to 6 months. It sounds to me like you all have stepped into a significant pivot, and you've kind of fully gotten the major drivers of your work in place. As you look to the next 3 to 6 months, what do you think the challenges are? You all seem to have this ability to read the tea leaves. So help us say, what are you reading? What are you preparing for? What should we be thinking about?
I'll start. And I think it's about this, you have to have that balance in this process. And, we've been around for over 100 years, for, we're sustainable because I think we're able to not be afraid to make some changes. I think we all recognize that it's going to be extremely challenging in the months ahead, but you can't solely look at just the next 1, 2, 3 months. You have to have both a long game and a short game and keep your eye on where you want to go. And that's going to require, it doesn't mean you're ignoring what's happening currently, because you have to, we have to serve, and we're doing this in a way to ensure that we're sustainable. We keep the girl at the center of everything that we do. We remind ourselves of this. We've talked with the board chairs about our VUCA world for quite some time. And so being prepared for that helps us to balance that long and short game. So that's how I kind of look at it, that you can't really just focus on one at the exclusion of the other. You have to be able to look at both channels.
Well, thank you, Kathy. Really how I'm seeing it as well is sort of, luckily we were prepared, and we were put into a whitewater Category 5. And, you know, we had our safety equipment, our
You
helmet,
sure did.
all like this, and we find ourselves, we got through the category 5 and we're paddling, and as we're paddling, we hear a sound, and we think, okay, that sounds like a waterfall coming up, and then as we get closer, we know it's a waterfall and another category 5 so coming up. So there's a lot of uncertainty, no question about it. We feel grateful that we've come through the first, but we know there are significant challenges ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my family.
And not one of us has the answer, right? It's this collective, this alignment that is so important.
Well, I have to say, you know, having run a network, it jumps out at me that you have this all on steroids. I just have to say, and I think it goes to the metaphor that Sylvia just put forward. I come from a family that are whitewater kayakers, and you don't get to a class 5 unless you have just extraordinary skill building over a period of time and really careful testing. So you kind of scale up. So it sounds like what, in some ways you're saying, look, we've done this incredible muscle building over many years. We've built these skills, these competencies, this esprit de corps that allows for us to do our work. So when we got slammed with this, we were really able to pivot. So it's a powerful learning that as nonprofit leaders, all of whom are on this call, prevention is the best way to deal with crisis. And so don't ever shoot yourself. But secondly, don't squander a crisis. Use this to strengthen your movement. Those are big themes.
And Mary,
hope is not a strategy.
Yeah,
hope is not a strategy.
And Mary, you know, you were one of the first CEOs that immediately reached out. I remember talking to you early on in early March on a Sunday, and we talked for a couple of hours, and you framed out everything. So, you know, I feel like I was, you know, schooled in a good way by Mary to shift the priorities and focus, and to have that type of relationship with the CEOs and our board chairs is so important.
Yeah, it's critical. So we've got questions coming in from the audience. So I'm going to fire these. I'll ask maybe one of you to in the time we have left.
Okay.
Am I back? Am I back?
You're back.
Okay, good. So we have a bunch of questions. I'm going to give you, why doesn't one of you just take it so we can move through them? So just looking ahead, where do you see the greatest challenges and opportunities for Girl Scouts movement, given how much uncertainty? So what's your greatest opportunity in the next 3, 6, 12 months?
Kathy, you want to take it?
I'll take it. I'll say reach and growth. Because remember I said it, you know, it gives us a permission to innovate, and what we're really doing on the digital side, the investments we're making, I think that's a huge opportunity for us.
Great. So this kind of pivot to technology allows for a kind of scale that might have gone much slower had we not had this crisis.
Absolutely.
That's great. Second question, where might other organizations get stuck when attempting a similar pivot? In other words, what are the pitfalls? What have you all observed? Wow, that's a little sticky over here. Pay attention.
I'll take that one.
Shocking.
Yeah, no, you can't go it alone. I love the African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And, you know, working with our federated movement of 111 councils, you know, I like to say, if we want to go fast, we have to go slow, because we have to bring people along. And it isn't come along to our vision, come along to the co-created vision. So there is a lot of meetings, and now they're all Zoom or GoToMeeting or virtual, but you have to have that because it isn't top down, it is co-created.
So let me just push a little bit on that. So co-created in the midst of a fast-moving crisis. So how do you balance that?
You know, Mary alluded to it. I think we were on 14 hours of a day of webinars and Zoom meetings, and then we still had to do our work in addition to, you know, react to the situation. So not a lot of sleep going on for a while there, but we're grateful that we did, because, you know, we stood up 2 programs. You know, our iconic cookie program, we got an online store and dealt with the huge challenges in that was less than 10 days. The other one is we virtualized our entire program. that happens by a Herculean effort of everyone coming together and, having people in real time tell you the pitfalls, the opportunities, the challenges, and, some things that we got wrong at the first days, we've gone back and fixed. We didn't let perfection be really the enemy of getting the good out there. So that was really key. Mary, how did, I know Kathy's agreeing. How about you adding to that?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, though, I don't think we've mentioned the fact that that Sunday call from Sylvia was about a COVID-19 task force that we stood up that was a combination of 5 CEOs from around the country of varying size councils, national staff, working together to really plan for what the CEO community, the council community needed support with in the near term, and simultaneously be building a timeline for how we build out, scale, as we learn best practices and look beyond to the near term. So the work of that team has been pretty amazing to help align us.
So I want to highlight something, and then there are a bunch of questions around a similar theme. The thing that I'm hearing from all 3 of you is, by the way, Dan, we take these values around collaboration and communications and transparency and focus on mission and the girls at the center, no matter how dramatic the storm that we're facing. We have to dedicate more time and energy to it. That's just a bummer, but that's what we do because that's what we stand for. And that carries us, Sylvia, the way you were just talking about it, through the day, even if it means 14, Mary, 15-hour Zoom calls, because at the end, if we go fast, we run the incredible risk of making not collective decisions, which means we'll fall apart as an institution. I just want to, that's a loud message that I just think is hard as a leader when you're in the middle and you're full of anxiety about what could happen, to let your values or especially collaborative decision making go. So I just want to highlight that. I think it's amazing.
Again, I just want to add to that point, what you're saying, just to clarify that a bit, is what we're not saying is we're going to spend forever to get to an answer.
Clearly,
we need to be quick.
Yes.
So we're going to do everything we can to get as much input and perspective and thoughts into a decision, but we need to make a decision. But then you heard Sylvia and Mary both say that when something isn't right, we pivot, we change, and we acknowledge when we need to change course. So I think that gets to that authenticity that and Mary said vulnerability, which I love that word. It gets to that point.
Yeah, but I think you're also raising something important. Just because you have more collective decision making and really rigorous input doesn't mean that you're stuck in your ability to move agilely. And you all are, that's why we're talking today. You're a powerful case study. So we've talked a lot internally about what you all did. Let's take a look externally. And Mary, you hit a little bit on this with your example of both a donor and the Meals on Wheels program, but how was it managing external stakeholders? We've got a lot of questions about folks like, so a lot of us have all sorts of complex external relationships and they're all moving at different paces. How did you all manage that?
I think the Cookie Care program is an amazing example of that. And how we were able to manage that is you said it earlier, prevention allows you to move faster in crisis. So those tough relationships, those tough conversations, the negotiating, the renegotiating, figuring out your supply chains, logistics, all of that, we had those conversations earlier, and they were tough. They took a long time, and that allowed us to manage a huge number of stakeholders, all the way down to the girl who's selling the cookies to the bakers. So one of those things, it's hard to create those relationships during the crisis. So I'm so grateful that we did that very challenging work, everything from having a board task force that helped us look at, the cookie program in its totality to, the task force that Mary talked about, and she's been an amazing member of the cookie. So it has allowed us to make some strong changes so that when this happened, there was already that trust to have the tough conversations that needed to be done, but it enabled us to, launch in 10 days.
Yeah.
And I would add, so, and I don't know if locally, we have a strong United Way community in my local Houston community, which is great. And early on, we were convened, all the agencies were convened to share kind of how we were doing, what we were doing. And one of the members of the call said it so well. She said, she acknowledged that the Houston term was stay home, stay safe. And stay home and stay safe don't always go together for all families. And so they were seeing an increase in shelters. And it just brought home to me as a community how important it was as a sector that my Girl Scout troop leaders were checking in on the girls that were in their troop and making sure they were okay and making sure they were connected, that the seniors, the volunteers at Meals on Wheels were checking in with those volunteers, making sure they were okay. The shelters were open to welcome our community members who are homeless or fleeing abusive relationships. But it takes all of us working as a community to make sure that no one is falling through the cracks as we navigate something so difficult. And as we say in Houston, we're not just facing one black swan event, we're facing two, with the demise of the energy sector and all that's going on in the energy sector in addition to COVID-19. It's just a really tough environment right now, and it's a time for us to all be collaborative.
And Mary, you brought up something that grounded us that I think we haven't talked about, but we make it a point to always tell a mission moment or a girl story in our work. Mm-hmm. And that grounds us. So whether it's the girls making tens of thousands of face masks, to the girls adopting senior centers and writing those cards and letters, or the tens of thousands of cookie boxes, because our cookies are emblematic of so much. They're an American icon. So when that first responder, that trucker, the healthcare worker gets the cookie, it is, somebody is grateful. Somebody is acknowledging them, that they're putting their life on the line for others and is saying thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think those moments are really super important. And so we simply always remind each other why we're here. And it's for the girl. And it's not, people aren't just looking at what we do, it's how we do it, how we engage, how we listen. The how is so important.
One of the kind of stark experiences as I'm engaging with the three of you is that there is a kind of culture that seems to be attended to by you all as leaders that is at its heart about drawing on a set of values that build a kind of resiliency that then permeates what you do. So I just got to hold up a mirror and just say it's how gratifying as I listen to you all. I knew a lot about the Girl Scouts beforehand, and I've known Sylvia for many, many years, but it's quite overwhelming. And so it leads me to a number of questions. A number of people have been exploring, okay, this is remarkable. It sounds like the COVID crisis for the Girl Scouts has been transformative. And so people are saying, so kind of knowing that there's a lot of unknown, what difference will this make for you all? Who are you going to become as, a major institution for civil society, period, end of sentence, and then a critically important particular organization for young women and girls kind of in the future. So what has this crisis done for you all in terms of who your identity is and where you're going?
Kathy?
I don't think it's changed our identity. I think it's given greater awareness and clarity as to, who we are and what we represent, and the potential that's out there for so many who haven't had the opportunity to experience what we're all about. It's not lost on us. We've been around for over 100 years and we've had to always change, but we embrace the future. We have, we like to say we have one hand holding the future and the other hand holding the past. But I do think this is creating a greater awareness, and I think it's a huge opportunity for us. And we're not afraid to pivot make the tough decisions and to pivot into this new world that we're entering in. you can say it's technology, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but it helps us to get there at the speed of girl.
You know, I completely agree with everything Kathy said. You know, clearly it's going to be a hybrid solution going forward, because that is really how people are living their lives. But we're looking forward to the day that it's safe to go out and camp. We're looking forward to when we put down the mobile devices. What I like to say, you know, we recognize we are not human doings, we're human beings. And we think about the whole girl, the social, emotional, leadership potential. And we want to make sure we embrace all of that. Now, I recognize completely that, you know, this event has caused us to move quickly into the digital space, and we'll embrace that in a hybrid way. But we're really looking forward to also putting the devices down and staring at the stars around the campfire.
Yeah, right. I think we all are. So heads up, we've had a ton of questions, but one that I personally am going to exercise the right of moderator, that I'm curious, aside from your experience with Girl Scouts, all three of you are quite remarkable leaders. There's energy, there's vision, there's passion. You know, this has been a really tough period. What is it you do as each of you as individual leaders to really, a friend of mine talks about drinking while you pour. And if you're doing 14-hour Zoom calls and being highly collaborative while driving change, living with ambiguity, that's exhausting as leaders. What is it, I'm really curious, what is it each of you do? Because I think we're all searching as leaders. What are the best practices? How do you fill your well? How do you sustain this work? Because if we don't, we're gonna burn out and then we're good for nothing. So I'm curious.
So I'll start. I have this this concept that I always talk about. It's like, in order to be selfless, because a lot of us in these roles, we need to be that. You have to be a little selfish. So it's being selfish to be selfless. You have to take care of yourself. You have to find those things and make yourself a priority. Take time to do whatever it is. It could be whatever. I know I said, please don't ask how many Girl Scout cookies I ate in the last 2 months. But I need to say a lot, and my weight even reflects it. But there is, you have to take care of yourself. So it's being a little selfish in order to be selfless.
You know, I agree with that. And I think also for myself is trying to get exercise. So sometimes that means not doing the Zoom call, but doing it on the phone. So I'm walking and getting my steps in. That's very important, having a routine. And then for me, it's being connected to the girls and being part of girl programming, whether it's a virtual camp experience or being with girls as they're talking to astronauts. Then you hear their excitement, their enthusiasm, and then it recharges you and you say, okay, I can do this.
I feel like for me, it's same with Sylvia. A lot of my husband will peek around the corner about 6 o'clock each night and say the dog needs a walk. So the dog does a lot to make sure that we get out. And the weather has been amazing in Houston over the last 6 weeks. So we've been able to get out and enjoy the beautiful weather and take breaks. I've done a number of calls where I've walked the neighborhood during the call. So that's actually been kind of nice to be able to do that. And we generally have dinner together at night, so I'll pop into the kitchen and we'll have a meal. So I do think it is important to take those mental health breaks. But I feel like my friends know the moment that I need that spark the most, because I'll get a call or somebody will tag me on social media. A friend tagged me the other day with her daughter was in a tent sitting outside of her house, and her Girl Scout leader had dropped off some more packets at all of the girls' homes, and they were having a Zoom meeting. Every girl got in her tent in the backyard, and they had s'mores together and had a Zoom meeting, and it was, she said, the best thing that had happened. So people share those bright spots with me along the way, and it always seems to come at just the right time.
Yeah, it's a great gift to this kind of work.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you three, one, for taking the time today. Often I think we work so hard to go to the balcony, as it were, and reflect on what we are learning, and then to do the hard work working with you to prepare, the really sharing of this narrative, which is so important. particularly because I think we're not anywhere near the kinds of changes that we're going to be seeing. And we need organizations, networks, and leaders who can really honestly talk about what works and what doesn't and what they're learning. So it's a great gift that the three of you have shared. And I was sharing with you all before we got on the call that I've long held the kind of leadership qualities Girl Scout seems to routinely produce. And I was a huge fan of Frances Hesselbaum, who was a personal hero about what it meant to be a social sector leader, who was, kind of courageous and deeply passionate and highly professional all at the same time. And just, I have to say, all three of you have modeled that on steroids. So I just want to thank you all on behalf of independent sector and civil society for really sharing your stories. And I don't think this will be the last time we'll be talking. So thank you all very much. And thank you all for those of you who have joined us. And just a reminder that we'll be doing a whole series of these kinds of pop-ups and conversations. So you can join us next week. On Thursday, we'll do a pop-up, our first pop-up, really kind of fascinating program. I'm sorry, it's Tuesday the 19th, and then Thursday the 21st is our normal policy briefing, where we keep people up to date on what is going on in Washington, how do you make sense of it, and what you need to be able to do. Thank you so much for joining us, and again, to the Girl Scouts, to Sylvia, to Kathy, and Mary, thanks so much for your extraordinary leadership.